Dusk slipped slowly across the high desert, settling its red-gold hush over the land, as if the world were holding its breath. And down in the vast silence of Red Canyon, where wind moved like an old spirit whispering through stone, an old memory began to stir. It was the memory of a woman who once walked into the night carrying more weight than her bones were meant to hold, and how the canyon itself seemed to rise to catch her. Her name was Marisol Granger, though in the town of Dust Haven, people said her name differently, softly when she passed, louder when she didn't. She walked the main street that evening like a ghost made of bruised hope, her shawl fluttering around her swollen belly. Lanterns trembled in the wind, throwing her shadow long and thin, as if the world itself was unsure of her place in it. Women at porches paused their knitting. Men at saloon doors exchanged looks. And old Wex Nolan, who sold flour and stories with equal enthusiasm, whispered into a customer's ear, "Poor thing. Should have known better than to marry a Granger." Dust Haven was a small place, but small places have long tongues. Marisol felt all of them against her skin. She lowered her eyes, pressing a hand against the life turning gently inside her. Shame came easier than breath. She had grown accustomed to the weight of it. It clung to her like dust on the hem of her dress. But the shame was not hers. Deep down she knew that. The world simply hadn't given her permission to believe it. Earlier that day, as the sun still burned high and cruel, Elias Granger had pushed her out of their home, letting the screen door slam behind her, as if that sharp crack might erase her from the earth. Elias, handsome as a poster outlaw, and twice as mean, had long practiced the art of looking righteous in the eyes of others. He wore his silence like armor, his charm like a polished spur, and when he told people he was the injured party, most nodded without asking whose blood stained the ground. He blamed her for things he himself had done, blamed her for whispers he had planted, blamed her for a child growing inside her that frightened him because he could not control it, because it would reveal truths he hid behind liquor and swagger. She remembered falling to her knees as he shoved her, dust rising around her like smoke from a dying fire. Sheriff Calderbone, strolling by with his usual reluctance to interfere in anything that might require courage, had glanced their way and then just kept walking, as if he didn't see the bruise already blooming on her cheek. No one helped her up, so Marisol did it herself. Now the sky was dimming, brushing the world in a soft, bruised blue, and she found herself walking farther than she planned, out past the edge of Dust Haven where the land turned wild and the wind carried scents of sage and loneliness. She should have turned back. She should have found Clara May Fitch, the midwife who had always been kind to her. But the shame, the hurt, the exhaustion, those were heavy things, and heavy things lead a person to wander. She didn't hear Elias until he was nearly upon her. His boots crunched on gravel, hard and impatient. His breath smelled like whiskey. His voice was tight, as if someone were pulling the threads of his patience too fast. "You think you can walk away from me?" he asked. She froze. Her heart stumbled in her chest. "I wasn't," she tried, but he cut her off. "You weren't thinking." Like always. The wind picked up then, sweeping her hair across her face. A coyote yelped somewhere far off, a thin sound swallowed quickly by the rising darkness. Elias grabbed her wrist, fingers digging into tender flesh. "You're not ruining my life," he hissed. "You hear me? You're not dragging me down with your damn mistakes." "My mistakes," she whispered. Her voice felt too fragile for the open sky. He tugged her forward, ignoring her gasp as she stumbled. They were moving toward the canyon now, its mouth gaping wide, shadows pooling like ink between jagged rocks. The canyon always looked hungry at night, but tonight it looked something worse, expectant. "Elias, please," she begged, tears blurring her vision. "The baby. You think I care?" His laugh came out sharp, splintered. "That child ain't mine, and you know it. You should have thought twice before you." The rest was lost in the wind. He dragged her to the edge. Her breath turned thin. Her hands curled around her belly. "Don't," she whispered, her voice cracking. "Please, Elias, please." But Elias Granger was not a man built for mercy. He pushed. Her cry split the night as she tumbled, rocks scraping her arms, her dress tearing against the jagged slope. She fought for anything, any branch, any root, But the canyon was deeper than desperation, and she slid down its side until her body slammed into a bed of cold sand. Her vision swam. Pain lit her insides in small white fires. And the world went dark, the canyon swallowing her whole. But the canyon was not empty. Far above, on a sandstone ridge shaped by centuries of wind, a lone figure watched the stars with the stillness of a carved spirit. His name was Sage Walker, an Apache warrior who walked the land with reverence and carried his silence like a promise. His eyes scanned the horizon the way other men read letters. Carefully, completely. When he heard the fall, he knew it was not the cry of an animal or the collapse of loose stone. It was the sound of a human spirit breaking open. With swift, controlled movements, Sage descended the ridge, boots pressing softly into the dust, braids swinging faintly behind him. The moonlight washed him in silver. He followed the sound through the canyon's winding throat until he reached her. Marisol lay curled on her side, breath shallow, hair spread like a dark halo in the sand. Bruises smudged her skin. One hand protectively covered her pregnant belly, even in unconsciousness. Sage approached with the hush of someone approaching sacred ground. He knelt beside her and placed 2 fingers gently at her neck. Still alive. A flicker of gratitude crossed his eyes. She stirred at his touch, panicked for a moment, trying to pull away with the last scrap of strength she had. "No, please. I didn't. I'm sorry," she whispered, disoriented. Sage did not speak. Words were not needed to offer safety. His calm alone was a kind of language. He knelt a bit farther back, giving her space, then gathered dry grass and small twigs, building a tiny fire with a practiced hand. The orange glow bloomed slowly, as if cautious not to frighten her. Marisol watched him through blurred vision. Something inside her relaxed. Not trust, not yet, but a loosening of the knot that fear had strangled around her ribs. He offered her water from his canteen. She hesitated, then took it with trembling hands. Warmth from the fire softened the icy ache in her limbs. Sage kept his distance, only moving closer when she tried to rise and nearly collapsed again. He caught her without gripping too tightly, guiding her gently to sit. "Why?" she tried to ask, but her voice gave out. He didn't answer. Instead, he draped a woven blanket over her shoulders, earthy brown, soft, smelling faintly of smoke and cedar. It felt like shelter. He led her into a narrow fold in the canyon wall where he'd stored supplies from his travels: dried corn, a roll of cloth, a wooden bowl. He ground corn into mash, heated it by the fire, and offered it with both hands, palms up, a gesture of respect. Marisol ate in small bites, tears slipping down her face without her notice. No one had offered her care in so long that kindness felt like a foreign language she had forgotten how to translate. Sage sat across from her, legs crossed, his silence steady. He studied the stars through the crack of sky visible above them, the canyon walls rising like cathedral pillars. He was close enough to protect her, distant enough not to intrude. She watched him through the flicker of firelight, strong, quiet, grounded in a way Elias never was. There was something ancient about him, something deeply rooted. He did not look at her with pity or judgment, only presence. And in that quiet, something softened inside her, something small but real. As she drifted toward sleep, she whispered, barely audible, "Thank you." Sage inclined his head, a gesture that felt like a blessing. The fire cracked softly. The canyon wind hummed its low song. And there, in the place she had been thrown to die, Marisol Granger found her first night of safety in a very long time. She slept while Sage kept watch, still as stone, patient as dawn, waiting for morning to rise and carry them both back up the canyon wall and toward a world that had tried to bury her. But the world was about to learn that what falls can rise again, especially when guarded by a soul who listens to the land and walks beside broken hearts with quiet, unshakable grace. Morning rose with a pale, milk, soft light that crept into the canyon like a blessing, brushing the sandstone walls with gold. Marisol opened her eyes to see dust motes drifting in the beam above her, tiny, floating worlds, suspended in air as if time had slowed out of mercy. For a moment, she forgot where she was. Then she felt the blanket over her shoulders, warm with the faint scent of cedar. She saw the small fire smoldering low, and she saw him, Sage Walker, standing at the canyon's mouth, watching the horizon with a stillness that felt carved from earth itself. He turned when he sensed her awakening, offering no words, only a gentle nod. It was enough. Words would have been too heavy anyway. Marisol sat up, wincing at the ache that rippled through her body. Sage approached slowly, extending his hand, not to pull her up, but to give her the choice. It was a gesture she wasn't accustomed to, a gesture that said, "Your body is your own. Your path, too." She took it. Together, they ascended the canyon path. Sage walked a step beside her, adjusting his pace to hers without ever acknowledging the kindness. Each time she slipped on loose gravel, he steadied her with a quiet grace that made her throat tighten. No man had ever offered her help without wanting something in return. No man had ever seen her dignity before her shame. When they emerged at the ridge, the sun spilled across them in a burst of warmth. Dust Haven lay in the distance, roofs glinting faintly, smoke trails curling upward as the town stirred awake. Marisol's heart clenched. She didn't fear the canyon. She feared going back to a world that had already pronounced judgment upon her. But Sage stood beside her like a silent anchor, and she found breath she didn't know she still had. They walked toward town slowly, their steps shaping a small rhythm in the dirt. It was calm, almost peaceful, until the first gasp rose. Old Wex Nolan spotted them from a shop door, his eyes widening like cracked marbles. Behind him, Mrs. Dottie Pierce clutched her apron and sputtered. She came back, with an Apache at her side. Voices swelled like a rising storm. She ran off with him, knew it. Look at her dress, torn to shreds. Poor Elias, his woman disgracing him like that. Their whispering hit her harder than any stone in the canyon. Marisol felt the old shame trying to climb her spine again. But Sage stepped closer, not touching her, not shielding her, but aligning himself as though her dignity were worth standing with. And that small gesture, quiet, steady, gave her just enough strength to keep walking. Sheriff Calderboone drifted forward with a stiff gait, hat tipped low. He eyed Sage with caution, then turned to Marisol with something like confusion, as if unsure whether he should offer help or maintain distance, so he wouldn't be pulled into trouble. Before anyone could speak, the saloon doors slammed open. Elias Granger stormed out, boots heavy, face red with a mixture of anger and feigned concern. "There you are," he shouted, voice trembling with false worry. "My wife, taken by this savage. Sheriff, arrest him." The crowd shifted, always ready to follow a louder voice. Marisol stepped back instinctively, her body remembering old fear. Sage's posture changed almost imperceptibly, shoulders lowering, stance rooting deeper, as if preparing to bear the weight of whatever storm Elias intended to unleash. Elias approached, pretending to reach for Marisol's arm. "Come here, honey," he said, dripping poison under a mask of gentleness. "You must have been terrified. Come home with me." Home. The word felt like a bruise pressed too hard. Before she could react, Clara May Fitch, steady, silver-haired, resolute, stepped between them. Her eyes, sharp as sewing needles, scanned Marisol's face, her torn dress, her bruised wrists. "Oh, for heaven's sake," she muttered. "Let me see." Clara May's hands were gentle but firm as she examined her. The crowd leaned in. Even the sheriff looked nervous. After a long moment, Clara May straightened and spoke loud enough for every watching soul. These injuries weren't from a fall. Someone grabbed her. Hard. A ripple passed through the crowd. Marisol closed her eyes, breath shaking. She had never asked for any of this. She never wanted an audience for her private pain. But Sage's quiet presence at her side reminded her of the canyon. How silence could hold someone instead of suffocating them. When she opened her eyes again, it was not fear that guided her voice, but something gentler, something rising. "It was him," she whispered. Every head turned. "He pushed me," she continued, "into Red Canyon. He didn't want the baby." Gasps. A drop crate. Someone murmured a prayer. Elias's face twisted. "You liar," he roared. "Don't you dare." He reached for the revolver at his hip. Time slowed. Wind drifted loose dust into the air, swirling like pale smoke. The sheriff hesitated. He always did. The crowd froze. But Sage did not. He stepped between Marisol and Elias with the calmness of a man placing himself in the path of a river. No weapon in his hand, no thread in his posture. Only a quiet, unshakable truth. "The land brought her back," Sage said softly. "You will not take her again." Elias fired. The sound cracked through the air like a lightning strike. Marisol flinched, clutching her belly, breath locked in her lungs. But Sage had already moved. He struck Elias's arm aside with a swift, clean motion, the bullet grazing Sage's upper arm, tearing cloth and skin, but changing nothing about the steadiness in his eyes. Elias stumbled, shocked by his own miss. Before he could fire again, Sheriff Boone finally acted. Years of timidity melted in a burst of overdue courage as he tackled Elias to the ground, wrenching the gun from his grip. The crowd surged, not to help Elias, but to restrain him, to stop him from rising, to mutter curses they'd never dared to say aloud. The truth had snapped the spell Elias held over them. Sage took a quiet breath and shook off the dust. Blood trickled down his arm, but he barely seemed to notice. Marisol reached for him on instinct. "Are you hurt?" she whispered. Sage looked down at her hand, touching his. He shook his head once, slow, reassuring. "It will heal." She felt her throat burn with something she hadn't felt in years. Relief so pure it made her knees tremble. Elias was hauled away, shouting accusations that nobody believed anymore. Sheriff Boone promised charges would be filed. Clara May stood taller, eyes burning with the protective fire of a woman who had delivered half the town's babies and knew the value of every mother. And the people, those same people who once whispered against Marisol, now watched her with something like remorse softening their faces. But the shift that mattered most was the one inside her. She breathed deeply, as if her lungs finally remembered their purpose. Sage stood beside her, quiet as always, but there was something warm in his eyes now. Not possession, not rescue, recognition. "Will you?" she began, voice trembling. "Will you walk with me? Not out of duty. Only if you choose it." He nodded once, steady sure. It was the gentlest yes she had ever received. A month later, dawn spilled across Red Canyon with a soft glow that warmed the world from the inside out. Marisol stood at the rim, belly heavier, heart steadier. Sage carved a small wooden charm, a tiny protective symbol for the baby. His knife moved slowly, shaping tenderness from cedar. The canyon below looked less like the place she fell, and more like the place she rose. Marisol closed her eyes and breathed deeply. She could feel Sage behind her, feel the quiet bond that had grown between them. Not rushed, not spoken, but formed through survival and presence and small acts of grace. When she opened her eyes, she saw the world with a gentler lens. The canyon had taken her once. Now it gave her something back. Maybe that was the way of the land. Harsh, but honest enough to reveal the truth beneath every fall. And so the old soul narrator speaks to you, the one holding this story in your hands. There are canyons inside all of us, deep places carved by cruelty, rejection, or the day someone decided we were smaller than we truly are. But hear this, the canyon is not where you end. Often, it is where you begin again. The world may try to push you into darkness, but grace rises from the most unlikely places, sometimes in the shape of a stranger who listens, sometimes in the echo of your own courage. Walk gently, friend. The land is wide and filled with hidden mercies. And when you find yourself at the bottom of your own canyon, remember, there is always a way back up, especially when someone walks beside you without asking for anything but your truth.